Caught him at a family cookout with my cousin, then learned he'd opened cards in my name. He wanted me to pay for his startup, but I brought receipts, lawyers, and a lock change instead. I felt my throat close before the scream could form. That's the moment that keeps replaying. The heat off the grill, July sun flashing on the chrome of a cooler's handle, and his hand on my cousin's waist like it had always belonged there. It's the sick little stutter where the world tried to buffer and failed. My name is not how this story starts. I'm 31. I live in Milwaukee, and I'm a clinical perfusionist at St. Mary's. One of those shadowy operating room jobs people never think about until their heart needs a machine to oxygenate blood while the surgeons do their choreography. Picture 2 ejection fractions, a cannula, an AC at above 480, a team whispering. That's my daily baseline. On paper, I love protocols. Before I touch bypass, I make checklists. Before I touch finances, I keep a spreadsheet. Before I touch trust, I want a reason. The one hobby that actually gets me out of my head is restoring vintage fountain pens. My apartment in the Lower East Side, Milwaukee's version, not Manhattan, is full of walnut trays lined with old Parker Vacuumatics and Waterman 52s, tiny sacks and breather tubes, bottles of ink like medicine. If you show me a cracked feed or a bent nib, I'll lose an evening making it right. Something tidy about flow returning when the channel is cleared. 2 years ago, I thought I'd found a person I could flow with. My fiancé, Matthew 33, tall in a Midwestern corn-fed way, with a laugh that hit low and warm. He'd left a regional accounting firm to build something scalable, his phrase, and I liked his appetite. He had a side hustle flipping vintage receivers and speakers, which is how we met. I was scouring a flea market for a Pelican nib. He was bartering for a Pioneer SX 1050. He carried the receiver to my car. I asked him for coffee. He asked me for dinner. 6 months later, he knew where every bottle of ink in my apartment lived. Early flags came disguised as qualities people praise. He had big visions and hated being told no. His mentors were treasure maps he swore would lead to the real rooms. He sent late-night texts full of ideas, then slept until 10. He loved that I was disciplined in the OR, but rolled his eyes at my budget notes. When he moved into my place, a 2-bedroom on E North Avenue, with brick that glowed at sunset, he said rent felt regressive, our first fight about money. I kept costs in a spreadsheet labeled N43 Baseline, XLSX, and titled our shared tab Household. He renamed it Rocket Fuel. Cute, irritating, forgivable. I paid more at first. His consulting gigs were lumpy, he said. My salary was not. I told myself it would balance when his idea an app that bundled micro-invoices for contractors launched. He liked to talk about how Americans die from 1,000 paper cuts. So why not sell Band-Aids in bulk? He registered Lattice Ledger LLC in December and kissed my forehead like we were already at the bell. Then came the spring with its long list of almosts. He almost closed a pre-seed. He almost landed a pilot with a roofing chain in Waukesha. He almost paid half the rent. He almost stopped flirting with my cousin Erin. I'm not the jealous type, I'm the log everything type. Erin is 29, works as a realtor in Racine, and thinks brand is destiny, which sure sell houses. She has great hair and an aura like a lit candle. At my aunt's Sunday dinners, she'd lean too close to Matthew's stories about deal cadence and ask questions with her mouth slightly open. He laughed harder around her than me, which was either cousin charm or hive mind. I noticed but didn't want to be a jailer. Money and respect are the 2 strings that will snap anything if pulled hard enough. Early May, I found a Capital One envelope with an activation sticker for a card I never applied for. The name was mine. The address was ours. I took a picture and asked Matthew, "Did you sign me up for something?" He smiled like I'd caught him frosting a cake. "Oh, babe, that's the cashback play for the household spend. We'll put groceries and gas on it and farm the bonus, then churn. I didn't authorize it. It's in your name for your credit history," he said, the way people explain sunscreen to toddlers. "I used your income line so the limit's higher. I'll manage the payments. You'll thank me when we're harvesting the points for Cabo." I'm good with words like harvesting. I'm less good with phrases like I'll manage. I logged into my credit monitoring app and saw 2 brand new inquiries, Capital One and American Express. Amex Platinum had been approved with a 12,000 limit. The balance, 3,480. 21. Category breakdown, business services, dining, misc and retail. The charges told a little road trip. Dinner at Birch Plus Butcher, drinks at Boone Crockett, a Saturday at Best Buy's Geek Squad counter, and 3 charges at something called Quickfile Tools. I texted him from the operating room lounge at 12:08 p.m., between cases. "We need to talk tonight about the cards." He responded at 12:12 p.m. Totally, about to change everything for us. The talk that night was a spin class with the resistance cranked to clown. He said the Amex was a short-term float until his investor wired early next week. He said using my credit was efficient because my W-2 and debt-to-income profile looked cleaner than his 1099. He patted my knee and said, "You're the COO of us. This is what executives do." I told him executives get consent before they leverage the company. He kissed me and said, "I'll make you so proud." I documented the conversation in notes with a timestamp, May 8th, 9:37 p.m. I saved screenshots of the transactions and pulled our lease, utilities, and the Venmo feed, where his lumpy contributions had turned into emojis and IOUs. He owed me $6,220 since February. My rent ledger on the landlord's portal had my name, my checking account, and his promise. The day my endurance burned out wasn't the day I found the cards. It was July 13th at my aunt's backyard cookout on Sheffield Avenue in Kenosha. Wisconsin sun, kids in sprinklers, an uncle oversalting the steaks. Matthew arrived late in a navy polo, brought a cooler full of Founder's Fuel, Topo Chico, and Lime hugged me absent-mindedly, and drifted to the garage where Erin was showing off a 2019 Mini Cooper she'd staged for a client. He lifted the hood like he knew anything about engines. She leaned on the grill and he put his hand on her waist. Not just resting, pressing, guiding. The way you steer a thought that's already decided. I watched for a full 8 seconds. Count them. 8 Mississippis. That's enough for a choice to be a pattern, not a fluke. When I walked over, Erin actually giggled, "How are you a grown woman who giggles?" and asked if I wanted to sit inside the Mini. Matthew said, "It's actually pretty roomy." He didn't let go. The rest of the day came with the jittery clarity of a trauma case. My aunt's dog barked, someone burned a brat, a kid cried because soda spilled, and I felt the steel cable of my life finally snap with a quiet twang. I went into the house, into the half-bath by the stairs, and stared at my own face in the mirror. No tears, no scream, just to-do lists. Breaking points don't have to be loud. Mine was a whisper that said, "Enough." Back at my apartment that night, he reached for me. I stepped back and said, "We're done." He went blank halfway. "You're not serious. You opened credit in my name. You're using me as your runway. And you're touching my cousin like you're shopping for a replacement. I'm done." He launched into a soliloquy about momentum and misinterpretation. He said the hand thing was mid-gesture. He said the cards were on the verge of being a huge win. He said I was reacting emotionally because the OR rewires women to think they can control everything. He liked that phrase, women in the OR. He thought it made him sound progressive. "I'm moving into a hotel," he announced, the way men announce. 2 weeks. We'll both cool off. I'll get the funding wrapped. "You're moving out tonight," I said, and walked to the closet with a cardboard box from the vacuum cleaner, which is always how a life ends, with a box that still smells like plastic and dust. He stayed at the Town Place Suites on W. Bluemound, room 318. I know this because he charged it to the Amex with my name on it. I reported both cards as fraudulent on July 14th, 9:10 a.m., while sipping coffee at my kitchen island. The Capital One rep had me verify addresses and employers. I gave dates, I provided screenshots, I filed a police report online MPD incident number 2507439, because that's what the credit bureau template suggested. I froze my credit at all 3 bureaus by 10:12 a.m. I requested a line item accounting from Amex and asked them to flag any authorized user additions, just in case he tried to add himself. He had. By noon, I'd changed the locks. Wisconsin lets a tenant rekey at their own expense if all leaseholders agree. I was the only leaseholder. I called my landlord, Mr. Leone, a 74-year-old who wears a cap that says USS Samuel B. Roberts, and he said, "Honey, you do what you need to." I took a picture of the new strike plate and emailed it to him for the file. He likes paperwork. At 3:07 p.m., Matthew texted that he'd left his prototype laptop in my office and needed it tonight. I told him we'd schedule a pickup with a witness present. He replied with 7 screens of moral injury, culminating in a line about how I'd sabotaged our family. I read it once and moved it to a folder called Matthew Escalation. I printed a copy and placed it with the police report and the credit freeze confirmations in a manila envelope labeled 25 July case. The next 2 weeks were logistics. I separated our accounts with surgical sterility. I closed the joint checking we'd opened at BMO Harris with a $250 promotional bonus, mailed a cashier's check for half the balance to his Town Place Suites, and kept the receipt. Check 01833, dated July 16th, 1174. 32. I changed the Wi-Fi password from 0xygen8 to bypass 6203. I opened a new P.O. box at 345W St. Paul Avenue, box 227, 82 for 6 months, cash. I asked IT at the hospital to update my emergency contact to my friend Lara, a nurse practitioner who once ran a marathon on a dare, because Matthew used to be that field. He didn't fade out, he crashed in. First, the money grief messages, paragraphs about capital commitments and bridge rounds that read like the pitch decks he never finished. He said investors were getting spooked because he'd had to mess with his burn rate to cover unexpected reimbursements, meaning the hotel, and how that was on me. He said he needed me to unfreeze my credit for 48 hours so a partner at a fund in Chicago could run a soft pull. I asked for a name. He sent Matt H. The investor's name was Matt. Cute. Then the romance grief messages, playlists full of songs we never listened to, photos from our first summer, my hair in the Lake Michigan wind, his arms around me, and paragraphs about the way I scented him. I filed them all. Then came the part where I realized he'd never really wanted me. He wanted my scaffolding. He showed up at St. Mary's on a Monday, August 5th, at 7:42 a.m., which I know because the lobby security log captured his entry. He told the front desk he was dropping off a laptop I'd left at home, trying to sound like we were still at home. He sat by the fish tank for 40 minutes, making a scene out of being patient, then waited near the staff elevator. I took the service stairwell 2 floors up and had Lara walk with me to the garage. He followed at a distance. I photographed him in the convex mirror at the corner and emailed the picture to security with the note, "Ex-fiancé, not permitted on staff floors. Request visitor alert." He pivoted to my family. He texted my mother, a librarian in Greenfield, who still believes if a book is in your bag, you'll remember not to be mean, that he was desperate to make it right. He called my aunt and told her Erin had misread signals because of family loyalty. He even texted my brother, who runs a landscaping business in Wauwatosa, to say he'd make me whole financially if we reset expectations. My brother sent him a picture of a shovel and said, "Use this to dig yourself out." Not helpful, but satisfying. On August 12th, an envelope arrived at my P.O. box, forwarded from my old building. Inside, a founder services agreement, printed on heavy paper with Lattice Ledger LLC at the top, my name pasted where COO should go, and a signature that looked like mine but wasn't. The compensation section promised me equity tokens vesting over 4 years. The witness line was blank. It was dated July 19th. He'd filed it with the Wisconsin Department of Financial Institutions as an exhibit to something called an offering memorandum. I almost admired the audacity. He was building a paper castle with my name on the gate. I walked the document down to an attorney named Sella Hofstad, 45, works out of a brick office on N Water Street, whose business card says, "Litigation for when sorry isn't enough." I found her through a perfusionist who divorced a cardiologist and wanted a gladiator. Sella read the agreement once and said, "He's tenderizing you for fraud." Her fees were $300 hour. I wrote a retainer check for $2,000. She drafted a cease and desist that afternoon, a 2-page letter with a tone like marble, giving him 72 hours to retract my name from any filing, to admit the forged signature, and to provide a written accounting of any representations he'd made using my credit or identity. She also sent a notice to Amex and Capital One with her letterhead attached. Banks listen when lawyers talk. 2 days later, he sent me an email that would make a judge frown and a novelist smile. The subject line, truth. The body, a wet mixtape about how entrepreneurs break a few eggs, how partners hold line of credit for each other, how his bond with Erin was purely conceptual, how I'd humiliated him in front of potential investors by freezing my credit, and how the only way forward was for me to engage in the short-term discomfort of releasing the holds so he could close the round on August 23rd. He added a paragraph about forgiveness that sounded like it was plagiarized from a sermon and a link to a Google Doc titled New Deal Between Us. I didn't reply. Sella did, with a subject line that included my incident number and an attachment reminding him of criminal penalties for identity theft under Wisconsin Statutes 943. 201. She copied a detective at MPD, the credit bureaus, and his registered agent. Then she added one line at the end that made me feel taller. Any further attempts to contact my client directly will be treated as harassment and responded to accordingly. Erin called me that evening. No giggle now. She asked if we could meet woman to woman to clear up misunderstandings. I told her we could meet woman to woman in small claims court if I found one real estate document that used my name to boost hers. She breathed into the phone like a horse. She said I was throwing away a good thing. And for a second I didn't know whether she meant him or her career pipeline through my aunt's network. I hung up without the drama she wanted. Then I opened my laptop and wrote a narrative log from the beginning. Dates, times, addresses, amounts, names, where we stood when the first flags appeared, the climate in the room when the cookout turned. I printed it and filed it behind the police report. You don't drain power by screaming, you drain power by building a ledger. He tried one more angle. showing up at my building with a bouquet of supermarket lilies and an apology that included the words brave and vision. The new locks turned him into a man holding flowers in a hallway for 13 minutes. The neighbor's Ring camera recorded it. He texted afterward that I'd violated his housing rights, which is comic because his name was nowhere on the lease. Mr. Leone emailed me a 2-sentence letter I could tape to the inside of my door, stating tenancy and the rekey authorization. I taped it anyway, not for the law, but for my own spine. The positive turn, when it came, didn't arrive with a kiss. It came on a Wednesday at 6:30 a.m., when I was setting up a coronary bypass on an electrician named Henry who'd spent 40 years installing the arteries of buildings. The anesthesiologist that day was a visiting doc from Minnesota named Axel. Swedish parents, grew up in Duluth, 40. Kind eyes that squinted when he was thinking. He said, "You do beautiful work," not in a flirty way, but like a colleague noticing a stable hemodynamic curve. We didn't talk about our private lives, we talked about tubing, oxygenators, the way checklists calm primates. When he saw the battered Waterman 52 in my pocket, he said his grandfather had one and that he'd always wanted to see how it worked. A week later, he came back to cover another case and brought his grandfather's pen. Black hard rubber, faded to chocolate, the imprint worn. "It hasn't written since '98, he said. After the case, in the break room, I took it apart with my small tools, slid in a new sack, reset the feed. We flushed it with water until it ran clean, then filled it with blue-black ink. He wrote his name on a paper towel and said, I didn't know handwriting could feel like memory. He didn't ask me about Matthew. He didn't try to solve me. He offered to carry the perfusion boxes back to storage without fanfare. That's when my ribs loosened. Not a love story yet, a respect story. You need those more. On August 23rd, the date Matthew had promised he'd close, seller received a PDF of a retraction he'd filed with the state. It was petulant, badly worded, and perfect. He admitted the founder services agreement bore an unapproved facsimile of my signature and that he'd mischaracterized my role. He notified the bureaus he'd tried to add himself as an authorized user on my accounts without proper documentation. He copied a lawyer who listed his office as a mailbox in a UPS store on W National Avenue. I printed a copy and slid it into the folder. It would be nice if the story ended there. Those stories do not end there. On September 2nd, I woke up to a new Instagram account, Lattice Ledger Truth, tagging me in posts about cold-hearted women who throttle innovation. The account had 5 posts, screenshots of me in scrubs with captions about parasite healthcare workers, pictures of Erin looking sanctified in a sundress, and a grainy photo of me outside my building with the word fraud across it. He'd cropped the angle from the Ring camera footage so it looked like he'd been filming a documentary. Not lurking in a hallway. I reported the account. Lara reported it. 10 other hospital staff reported it. Instagram took 2 days to kill it. In those 2 days, my phone pinged like rain. We escalated again. Seller filed for a harassment restraining order, case number 25 CV5638, in Milwaukee County Circuit Court. We attached the security photo, the texts, the forged agreement, and the Instagram posts. The hearing was September 10th at 10:30 a.m. Courtroom 5113, Judge Sandy Minor presiding. I wore a black blazer that made me feel like a standard operating procedure. Matthew wore a quarter zip that made him look like a golf dad. He represented himself. He told the judge he was passionate, not dangerous, that he'd made mistakes, but that greatness requires the willingness to be misunderstood. Judge Minor looked at him the way a mother looks at an untrained dog near an open gate. Son, she said, there is a difference between misunderstood and unlawful. She granted the order, 1 year, no contact in person, by phone, online, or through third parties, a 300-foot distance from my home and workplace, violation punishable by contempt. She spoke slowly when she read it, not for his comprehension but for mine, so I could feel each boundary slide into place. He lasted 6 days. September 16th, 8:42 p.m. He sent my brother a paragraph about forgiveness circles and told him to pass it on to me. My brother responded with a screenshot of the order and the words, "Try me." We filed an affidavit. He paid a $250 fine. He learned to breathe through his nose. On the work front, he tried a final trick, emailing St. Mary's Administration anonymously from an account called Patient Advocate ProtonMail.com, alleging that I stole narcotics from the OR. He picked the wrong profession to smear. We inventory like it's our religion. The pharmacy audit for the month was a grid of zeros near my name. Compliance asked me 3 questions, checked a log, and then called seller to ask if I wanted to file a defamation claim. We didn't, not yet. We let him think the mud slid. I've always believed endings should rhyme with beginnings. The hook of this whole thing was me staring at my own face in a bathroom mirror and choosing a ledger over a scream. The end mirrored that quiet, just a different bathroom, a different mirror. October 3rd, 7:10 a.m. Axel was in town again, staying at a hotel near the Riverwalk. He texted to ask if I could look at his grandfather's pen. The flow had slowed. I packed my tools and met him at the coffee shop in the lobby. The morning light through the atrium glass made everything look like it was covered in a thin layer of intelligence. I flushed the pen, reset the feed, and when he wrote one word: stay. Not with him. He had a flight that afternoon, but with myself. He meant, don't scramble your boundaries to feel like you're not alone. He meant, the right people walk at your pace. When I hugged him goodbye, it was clean. I went home and opened my fountain pen drawer and realized I could finally sell the ones that reminded me of Matthew. Anything he touched. I listed the Pioneer SX1050 receiver he'd once polished like a shrine on Facebook Marketplace. A guy named Vince drove from Sheboygan with cash and a grin and said, "These things sing." I counted out the bills, 650. I closed the drawer on the rest. My aunt called me in November to say Erin had moved to Florida with a personal trainer named Kyle, who says goat a lot. She said it like she was reporting cloud cover. I said I wished her the climate she believed in. Matthew, last I heard, was consulting again. He sent one more letter through his UPS store lawyer threatening to go public with his side, and Seller replied with a 3-sentence reminder of the order's expiration date and the collateral consequences of contempt. He folded. I kept small rituals. On the anniversary of the cookout, I took myself to the lake at 7 a.m., rolled up my jeans, and stood in the cold water until it felt like a border. I wrote in my log new pages now, new ink, that I'd learned the difference between love and underwriting. I wrote that the next person who touched my waist would be someone whose hand made me feel more like myself, not less. I wrote that I was not a runway, I was the air. A month later, on a Tuesday night after a long case, I came home to a package. A small, heavy box, no return address. Inside, a Waterman 5212V with a nib so fine it sang on paper. Tucked under it, a note in Axel's blocky handwriting, for someone who knows flow. No promise, no ask, no pressure. Just a tool for work I love. I filled it with blue-black and wrote the last line of the log that started this story. She said she'd forget me in a week. But I'm the one who forgot her.